The allegory of the cave in Plato's Republic is really the whole reason behind this YouTube channel. And you'll hear me talk about it a lot. It's an illustration that I like quite a lot. So we see images of things on the wall of the cave, but we don't realize that they're just shadows that the puppeteers are making behind us. If we want to see actual reality, we need to realize that we're being duped, and then we need to escape the cave, and we need to look at reality in the light of the sun. Now, this allegory is very true, and it's true in many ways, and it can have many applications. It doesn't just have to mean that the puppeteers are the elites and the people in power, like some kind of conspiracy, though there's definitely something to that, obviously. But no, the puppeteers can simply represent our own unexamined opinions about things. Ultimately, the allegory of the cave is a call to everyone to examine their opinions, wherever they may have originated, and then to graduate from having opinions about things to having true knowledge, to the extent that that is possible. Now, there's one particular shadow on the wall that is very obviously quite unexamined, and that is the idea of human rights. Where do human rights come from anyway, and what exactly are they? If I may say so, this is an example of something that most people will feel very adamant about, but haven't given much thought about, like, where that opinion came from. Hey, I might be wrong about my opinions on human rights, but I at least want to make the effort to scrutinize those opinions in the hope of reaching the truth, and I hope that you'll do that with me today as well. So on today's show, I want to demonstrate how easily we can be led to foolishness when we don't examine our opinions. And in particular, how a faulty understanding of rights, together with a faulty understanding of freedom, has formed like a perverse sugar daddy kind of government that is neither tenable nor just. Now, I think you're going to like this discussion, so don't go anywhere. I'm Jim Horan, the Worldview Bro. So let me jump right into this, guys. Obviously, there are many kinds of rights that a person might have, and many of them are not difficult to understand at all. You can have rights as a member of a gym. You can have rights as a stockholder, or think of a game or sports, okay? So like in soccer, you have the right to move the ball with your feet, but not with your hands. Now, okay, maybe these examples aren't great, but the point is that rights are about what we're owed or what we're allowed to do in certain societal contexts. Now, those examples that I talked about, we know exactly what those rights are and where they come from because we created them. Again, I'm talking about rights created in a contract or in the rules of a game, etc. Okay. It's a little trickier if we talk about the rights of a citizen, but it's way trickier if we talk about human rights or natural rights. Now, it may be the case that there are no natural rights at all, and that all rights simply come from contracts and games, like the ones we talked about. Now, this is actually the position of what is called legal positivism. And this is certainly, obviously also held by a strict postmodern philosophy, because they would say that all morality, all laws are mere social constructs. Everything is legal positivism, in their opinion. So there's nothing right or wrong about them. There's nothing right or wrong about laws or rights, etc. There's nothing inherently, nothing naturally right or wrong about them, but just right or wrong because we say so, or really because the people in power say so. So this is called conventionality. It's just a question of who is strong enough or persuasive enough to have their vision of law and therefore of rights to be binding. So the question is this: are human rights natural or conventional? Now, this is the big idea question that I want to address in the next few episodes. But I think it will be useful if we start this topic by contrasting two ways that we have understood the right of freedom in American history. I think this will show why it's so important that we try to find the truth behind rights and justice, okay? We need to be aware of the shadows on the walls and to move from there. So, we as Americans, assuming that most of my viewers are American, we were all taught in school, of course, that the Declaration of Independence says that we all have the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So liberty or freedom is one of the most important rights. And of course, the Founding Fathers understood this as a natural right, not a conventional right. The Declaration of Independence says that the right comes from nature and nature's God. So it's a big deal. Now, guys, why do you think we spent 4 episodes discussing the different views of freedom? Because it's going to have huge ramifications, not just at the cultural level, but very tangible ramifications at the political level. Now, don't worry, if you haven't seen my videos on the different understandings of freedom, this will still make sense, but you can certainly click on those videos on the corner of the screen here. So here's the thing, guys. I don't know if it's just me, but this should blow our mind a little bit. Is it not the stated purpose of our government to protect our rights, including our right to freedom? Well, yeah. So consider the massive difference between freedom number 1 and freedom number 3. Freedom number 1, very briefly, just means that we ought to be left alone, that no one should enslave us, physically restrict us in any way. Okay, our freedom to move our arm ends where the other guy's nose begins, right? And with a little more nuance to it, which I discuss in the freedom videos, this was the freedom that was meant by the Founding Fathers. And the people understood it that way. So government's job actually wasn't that complex in that vision. I'm not saying it was easy, but it wasn't complex. And that was on purpose. At the very least, the central government, the federal government of the nation, had very specific and enumerated powers because it was given very specific and enumerated ends, right? Tasks. But what happens when we start believing in freedom number 3? The role of government is necessarily going to increase exponentially. You'll remember that freedom number 3 was Elsa's freedom to let it go, right? No right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. So this is a postmodern vision of freedom that defines freedom as the fulfillment of the individual's will, the actualization of that person's aspirations. This is the understanding of freedom of progressive thought. So let's just clarify this. Let's say a little girl wants to be a ballerina. What does it mean for the girl to be free to be a ballerina? So in the traditional freedom number 1 sense, we should say, okay, you're free. Go do it. It may or may not work out for you, but we're definitely not going to let anyone physically stop you from practicing or buying the equipment that you need or doing whatever you need to do. So go for it. But when a progressive says that the girl should be free to be a ballerina, he means that the girl achieves freedom when she becomes a ballerina. Well, how's that going to happen? Well, the parents would have to pay for lessons, personal trainer, equipment, I don't know, whatever it takes. Well, suppose the parents don't do those things. So that means that the girl was never free to be a ballerina to begin with. If the goal isn't achieved, then the freedom was never there. Now, you probably don't believe me, but this is accurate. Let me show you with yet another example from the Supreme Court. Okay, I have to say the Supreme Court opinions are probably the best place to see how the latest philosophies that are cooked up in the Ivy Leagues, get propagated into our society via governmental power. Now, those ideas get propagated in other ways too, by the way, but anyway. So I'm looking at Justice Thurgood Marshall's dissenting opinion in Harris v. McRae. So Harris v. McRae, this was a 5-4 decision by the court that upheld the constitutionality of the Hyde Amendment of 1980. And the Hyde Amendment This is the law that restricts federal funding for abortion to cases only in which the life of the mother is at risk or to cases of incest and rape. So to clarify, this case wasn't about the constitutionality of Roe v. Wade. That's taken for granted in this case. It's strictly about when government should actually fund abortions. And again, the Hyde Amendment says that the government is only allowed to pay for it in those scenarios. Now, Justice Marshall objects. Why? Why does he object? These are his words, quote, "A denial of a Medicaid-funded abortion is equivalent to denial of legal abortion altogether." That's right. If a woman cannot afford an abortion, then she does not have the freedom to have an abortion. If a little girl's parents don't have the resources or time to realize her dream of being a ballerina, then she does not have the freedom to be a ballerina. Now, you might object that an aspiration such as being a ballerina is different from something like abortion, or let's say better yet, some obvious human needs like sustenance or shelter. But under the progressive view, we have a right to all those things because we have a right to anything that we want. Literally, I mean, that's that third view of freedom. Freedom means achieving our aspirations and desires. And now, of course, that includes basic needs, and it also includes dreams like being a ballerina. So, I mean, yes, food, health, job, but then also more suspect things like abortion, okay? Particular views of our identities, even dreams of being a ballerina or a basketball player, whatever you want. And here's the point that we need to understand. They're saying that we have a right to all those things, but also what they're saying, like what Thurgood Marshall is saying, that the right requires the fulfillment. Again, listen to this carefully. In the progressive view, the right requires the fulfillment, in particular by the government. And this actually goes back. This is what FDR meant by his second Bill of Rights. So this is a very famous address. This is FDR's State of the Union address in 1944, and it's typically remembered as the second Bill of Rights speech. So he said in that speech, in that State of the Union address, that we need to expand on what the founders taught us when it comes to rights and freedom, okay? He said that, quote, "Necessitous men are not free men," unquote. Okay, if your needs aren't met, then you're not free, right? So that's actually kind of related to that third view of freedom. He said that we need to supplement the original Bill of Rights, okay? That we should have a second Bill of Rights that guarantees, and so then he lists a bunch of things, but what really sticks out is he mentions that we have a right to a remunerative job, a decent living, and adequate medical care. And then he goes on to say that if American government should fail to provide these things to the people, then, quote, "we will have yielded to the spirit of fascism here at home." Okay, so he's saying this in 1944, and he's saying that if we don't agree with the second Bill of Rights and with the idea that government should be seen as our sugar daddy, okay, in charge of providing all of our needs, then we're pretty much Nazis, is what he's saying. Now, guys, please don't misunderstand me. I mean, you might be saying, dude, why are you shocked? Of course we have a right to a decent living and to medical care. It sounds like we need the second Bill of Rights. But that's precisely the thing, guys. I mean, Roosevelt, not the first progressive president, is thinking of rights as goals that must be fulfilled instead of principles of justice that mustn't be violated. I mean, what? We really don't think that prior to FDR, people also believed that it's good to have health and food and jobs? I mean, my God, how did civilizations of the past survive without a second Bill of Rights? Would the founders have said that, quote, "a decent living is a natural right," or that, quote, adequate medical care? Would they agree with Bernie Sanders that health care is a human right, a natural right? No, they would not. And I think I know what they would say in their objection to it, like how they would object. Look, obviously we all want everyone to have a decent living, and we want everyone to have good health care. And no, I'm not tossing that out as a throwaway line. I want to be understood on this, guys. I'm simply saying that health and a decent living, and certainly abortion, for example, do not meet the definition for a natural right. They just don't. Ultimately, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't conform to logic. And of course, to say that these things are not human rights is to violate our religion of the shadows on the wall. I mean, just think about it. It's very logical. If I have a natural right to healthcare, then that means that every doctor on earth is my slave by nature. Oh, come on, it wouldn't come to that. No. It's about the logic of the matter, guys. You have to take it to an extreme in order to see if it's going to make logical sense. So, like if I go on a 3-hour tour with Gilligan and the skipper, okay, and we're left stranded on an island, and thankfully there's a doctor in our party. So is he going to help us when we get sick? Well, I mean, he might do so out of kindness. You would probably expect that by his natural kindness, he would take care of people when they're sick because he's a doctor. Or he might do so because he agrees to do it, like if I help him gather some coconuts or whatever, do some kind of job, right? But what if he doesn't? Would I be right to force the doctor to heal me? Well, if I have a natural right to health care, then I would certainly be right in forcing him. Okay, so my natural right to health care means that doctors are by nature our slaves. Sure, we can usually get them to agree to it. Sure, we can usually tax enough rich people to pay the doctors well so that they do what we ask. But if push comes to shove, then it's going to be shove. But we know that that's wrong. Exactly. That's why healthcare is not a natural right. Okay. It's that simple, guys. It's not rocket science. We can think these things through. Okay. And not everything that we strive for in life is a natural right, guys. Okay. We're being duped with this kind of ideology. Okay. This is definitely a shadow on the wall. Okay. And it's the same thing with the idea of a right to a decent living. I mean, are you kidding me? Of course we strive for that, but nothing is guaranteed in life, y'all. Okay? If I have an unalienable natural right to a decent living, that makes a slave out of every other person in the world. We have to think through the logic of these ideas. No. I have a duty to provide for myself and for my children. Okay? And not a right to that provision. I have a duty to attain that provision. I don't have a right to that provision. Now, of course, progressives would criticize this line of thinking as, oh, okay, right, okay, I get it. So you're going to pull yourself by your own bootstraps kind of deal, right? Well, come on, guys. I mean, that's a bit of a straw man. Obviously, it's a part of government's job to facilitate an environment in which we can earn a decent living. If people are robbing my stuff, then government better stop them because we have a natural right to our pursuit of happiness, including, of course, procuring a living for ourselves. And there are many other things that government can do, and there's certainly nothing wrong with having a generous safety net, right? Having good safety net policies. Of course, that's fine. We can agree on so many things, and we can vote for something like that, right? Of course, that's fine. But we can do that without categorizing a decent living as a natural right. And it's not just a question of semantics. I mean, that becomes a mind bug, okay? It should certainly be the goal of any good government, of any good regime, to ensure as much as possible that absolutely everyone is healthy and well-fed and happy. Of course, that's the goal. But it may well be the case that this goal is best achieved when the government doesn't have the kind of power to attempt to secure those things in a direct way. A civilization of human beings is not a cage of lab rats that need to be fed every day by their superior masters. Okay? A civilization of human beings ought not be a city of pigs. The problem here is one of the scope of government and how that scope blew up in magnitude because we changed our definition of freedom as a society. See, look, if the duty of government is to secure our freedom, and if freedom means attaining my individual needs and desires, guess what just happened to government's duty? It's now infinitely large. The scope of government is now infinite. Its only limitations would be a limitation of resources. Now, of course, FDR, in this more expansive view of freedom, he only mentions things that we can actually all agree are good and necessary things, right? And he slyly connects this new definition of freedom, the fact that it needs to be attained, he connects it to the past view of freedom in order to massively expand the scope of government. But then, as the progressive movement continued, it became more evident that this new vision of freedom does not only include the attainment of the bare necessities of life, it includes the wishes and desires of every single person. But then how in the world is government supposed to fulfill the desires of every citizen? I mean, that doesn't even make sense. Well, certainly it can't, but it can do a better and better job at doing precisely that if it can have more and more resources and more power. So it's not surprising that, of course, we have seen with time a massive expansion in the scope of government, in the power of government, and the resources of government. So, anyway, when we look at the language, for example, of court opinions, they don't talk in language of right and wrong and natural justice. Okay, sometimes they do. But then you realize, then they start talking about the interest of this party and the interest of that party. Okay, so in this new view of government's function as the sugar daddy, right? Government's task now isn't really to establish justice. Okay, they'll certainly use that language when it's convenient to do so, but the task of government is now to balance the interests of everyone. It's government's job to balance out the wishes and dreams of every citizen. You should read some of these court opinions because you're going to see exactly that. So like in Roe v. Wade, they use the language of balancing interests. The woman is interested in terminating the pregnancy, right? So she has this right of abortion. So that's like her interest. But the state of Texas has an interest in preserving the life of the child. So there's a conflict of interest, different desires here. So then the court sets out to balance those interests. Well, in the first trimester, the interest of the woman's right to an abortion outweighs the state's interest in preserving life. Why? Reasons. Okay. Really well thought out reasons. But then as you get further into the pregnancy, then the interest of the state starts to outweigh the interest of the woman, right? And then they give clever names to the different balancing tests that they decide to apply. So like you have the strict scrutiny approach. And they sound like really smart, making up reasons for how they balance more on one side and then more on another. But then it kind of hits you that it's pretty damn arbitrary. And of course it is. And it's precisely because of freedom number 3. It's the philosophy, it's the bigger metaphysical thought process that is underlying the way that the court argues its cases. Now, of course, the court isn't entirely consistent on its jurisprudential philosophy every single time. I mean, for one thing, you still have some judges that believe in freedom number one and the principles of the founding and like actual natural rights. But the main thrust of the Supreme Court in the last 90 years or so has certainly been to maintain the facade of the Constitution and the facade of the principles of the Declaration of Independence, but only a facade. And then within that facade, okay, the content is actually like the application of the new way of governing. So where the goal is not to protect the natural rights of the citizens, and I mean the actual natural rights, but the goal becomes to balance out the dreams and interests of the people and to increase the power of the government in order to achieve that task. So what's the moral of the story then? I mean, I guess it's that ultimately, whatever worldview is predominant in a society, that will be the way that we're ruled. No matter what checks and balances that the founders were trying to put in place, it actually did kind of slow down the way that it all rolled out. But ultimately, a new philosophy was implemented in the way that we're ruled. Now, I still think that the majority of people want their government to establish and secure justice, not to manage and balance out interests. So, and don't be fooled by the government's language of justice, okay? They co-opt that language. And I know that government is not a monolith, okay? Don't paint me as a crazy, okay? But there is a dominant spirit. Obviously, government will have a dominant spirit, and that spirit is certainly one that doesn't believe in true justice. It believes in Thrasymacheian justice, right? Justice as the interest of the stronger, and conventionalism, right? And justice as conventional but not natural. They don't believe in a natural right and wrong, right? In a natural justice. And so anyway, guys, this is precisely what we're going to continue with in the next episodes. This idea of justice and rights. Are they natural or are they conventional? And so therefore, what are the natural rights if they exist? We need to see our way out of the cave on this one, guys. So anyway, thank you for hanging with me on this one. I hope it wasn't, too confusing. I feel like I mix myself up sometimes. So I'm just trying to clarify it as much as possible. So do let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Please don't forget to share and to like and to subscribe. And I guess I'll see you on the next episode, guys. God bless you.